Vice Chair. I thank the Chairman and Vice Chair for calling a caucus meeting. Who can soar with the eagles in the morning after hooting with the owls last night for a late night, and I commend all of you for doing both as well. It was a very transformative speech for some of us last night, because while our expectations for greatness and vision with the president are not high, he stooped to a new low in terms of how he dealt with issues. For example, the immigration issue and what it has meant to our country and how he characterized it. The opioid epidemic, which is in every district in the country a challenge, in many families a tragedy, and the president treated it in such a disdainful way. Actually, it is one of the items on the agenda that we're fighting for, increased funding for opioids in the discussion that we're having on the caps, on the parity issue, on the budget. Last night, the president delivered a speech of unwarranted self-congratulatory comments, beautiful to acknowledge the courage, the sacrifice of the people in the audience, as if he had something to do with the successes that they had achieved. Of course, we all salute them. It's an interesting story. More importantly, it's about the fabric of America that his speech was not about. Again, devoid of vision. So sad. The president presents himself with this GOP tax scam as something to help the middle class. He kind of presented that. Well, at the same time, his tax scam calls for 86 million middle-class families to pay more as he pads the pockets of the top 1%. The president presents himself as generous toward dreamers, but he's holding them hostage to the most extreme anti-immigrant agenda in generations. We heard more insulting words of ignorance and prejudice toward patriotic immigrant families last night. I just remind you, and I've said this to his people, this is a first in a long time. President Reagan was great on immigration. He did more than Congress did after Congress passed a bill. President George Herbert Walker Bush was great on immigration. The two of them protected a higher percentage of people than President Obama did with his executive orders. With their executive orders, they protected a higher percentage. President Clinton, of course, President Obama, President George W. Bush, one of the best presidents in advocating for immigrants and what immigration means to America, could not convince his own party. And now a president in complete departure of Republican presidents in modern times, Republican and Democrat, but you would expect the Democrats, Republican presidents in the lead, taking us down a road just red meat for his base. The president presents himself as a man of big ideas, and then he presents a lame, puny infrastructure proposal, completely underestimating or ignoring the infrastructure challenges our country faces. $200 billion over 10 years. That's $20 billion a year. And he advertises it a $1.5 trillion agenda. But again, giveaways to the private sector. Meanwhile, President Trump is completely silent about Russia's ongoing assault on our democracy and his administration's outrageous refusal to impose sanctions. What's that about? What is that about? Overwhelmingly, was it, Steny, over 500 people voted for the sanctions bill? The sanctions against Russia, and the president is ignoring it. What do the Russians have on him politically, personally, financially, that he would ignore his responsibility in that regard? President Trump's first years in office has been a wasted opportunity in meeting the needs of the American people. Again, he had an opportunity for unity. We always are hopeful for that. Instead of a hand of friendship, as some have said, he presented a clenched fist. And a fish at that. We were very proud of our response. Congressman Joe Kennedy in Massachusetts did such a beautiful job in responding. Delegate Elizabeth Guzman of Virginia responded beautifully and officially on behalf of a Democratic point of view. Democrats believe that the American people deserve better than what the president talked about last night. They deserve a better deal, better jobs, better pay, a better future. And that's what we will be working on. I found it liberating. It freed me of my personal thoughts about the president and said, this is so much bigger than that. None of us can afford the luxury of minor disagreements. This is very major. With that, I yield.
Your position and Senator Schumer and the pressures of your caucus, whereas you might have to address some of the liberal concerns in your caucus, whereas he might have to address...
Absolutely not. We are totally in unison. And for some reason, I guess it attracts attention. There's been some interest in making it look as if we're not. We are worked totally in unison on this. If there never were one dreamer in the world, and thank God there are many, we still have a problem on the caps. This is about the parity. This is about the budget bill. Maybe people don't understand when we say parity and caps what this is. What we're trying to say to the Republicans is, we take an oath to protect and defend the American people. We want the security that we need in terms of our defense bill. But our security in the domestic budget is 1/3 of the domestic budget. It's about homeland security. It's about the Veterans Affairs Administration. It's about the State Department. It's about anti-terrorism activity of the Justice Department. 1/3 of the domestic budget is security, is a security function. In addition to which, the investments that we have to make in the health and education and well-being of the American people are a source of our strength, as well as our military might, which is important as well. So this debate is about, if you want to increase the defense spending, and we are not objecting to that, we have to have a commensurate increase on the domestic side. You cannot increase defense and bleed the domestic budget and think we're going to be a strong nation. And part of what we're putting out there is bipartisan, and everything we've talked about bipartisan bill in terms of the Affordable Care Act. That too. Bipartisan. By the way, when the president has the Republicans cheering about lifting the mandate, that was a Republican idea. Mitt Romney, Heritage Foundation, that was no free riders. That was no free riders, a mandate that everyone had to participate. But to get back to this point, so what we have been proposing, both in what we're talking about in terms of dreamers, has been bipartisan. What we're talking about in terms of infrastructure has never been partisan. It's always been bipartisan, except if President Obama suggested something, that is. And now the Republicans would resist. But now, on this, we're saying, okay, let us increase the domestic budget in the following ways. Important investments in stopping the opioid epidemic. The President said it's important. You have to put the money there. Increasing the funding for our veterans. We know they need more funding. It's on the domestic side of the agenda. Increase the funding for our veterans. National Institutes of Health, where the biblical power to cure requires more. If you have a scientific opportunity, you have a moral responsibility to honor it, and that's job creating as well. Addressing our pension issue. And then separate from that, the entire issue on the emergency funding side of disaster assistance. Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands having a big shortfall, but addressing the other needs of states with hurricanes, forest dangerous fires, and the rest. So everything we're talking about, it doesn't have a partisan tilt to it at all. They're all issues where if you ask people, you bring it to the floor, it would win a bipartisan vote. So again, if there never were one dreamer, we're still having this fight because they don't want to fund the domestic side. That's what it's about. And they have to try to sell that to their members by increasing defense, but at the expense of domestic, and we cannot, we can do better. And so, yes, the Dreamers are part of that negotiation, but we're not there yet on the money. So nobody should say the Dreamers are holding up that negotiation.
Madam Leader.
I promise two.
When you dealt with former President George W. Bush, you had big disagreements over the war, over Social Security, but you had a relatively productive relationship.
We did.
It may have been helped by the fact that he wasn't going to be running for re-election. When you look ahead to potentially being in the majority next year, can you forge a productive relationship with President Trump, considering you?
Well, we had, again, may I just say, and I appreciate your calling to everyone's attention, that while we had serious disagreements, I think the war in Iraq is a tragedy for our nation, and hopefully one day there'll be an admission of that. But nonetheless, not to hold us up on issues that we had to move forward with the American people. And so we were able to find agreement. We passed the biggest energy bill in the history of our country. He wanted nuclear, I wanted renewables. Our caucus wanted renewables. We came to agreement. It was like taking tens of millions of cars off the road in terms of emissions and the rest, lowering the addressing the CAFE standards. PEPFAR. He wanted PEPFAR. We wanted big PEPFAR. That would be the drugs for addressing the HIV and AIDS crisis throughout the world. He was a champion on it. He takes pride in it, and he should. And he and Mrs. Bush continue to be involved in that issue, and they're to be saluted for that. Other issues that related to using the tax code to help people using the tax code to help people at the low end of the economic scale. Very progressive agenda. The list goes on and on. Contrary to what the Republicans did when they took the majority and President Obama was there, and they said our most important thing we can do is to make sure he doesn't succeed. That unpatriotic, un-American. We always have a responsibility to find common ground in the minority or the majority. That's our responsibility to the American people. And when we can't find it, we must stand our ground. That's our responsibility to the American people as well. And we are constantly open to finding solutions that meet the needs of the American people. But to do so, that doesn't go to the lowest common denominator, but to some kind of vision, a better future, better deal, better jobs, better pay, better future. Who can disagree with that?
Very last question.
Leader Pelosi, you spoke earlier this week about how if Democrats take back Congress, that you'd want to work on a fair tax system. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean? Is that basically like a repeal and replace of the new tax law?
Well, it may have to be a replace and repeal. Replace them and repeal the bill. Mr. Crowley and Congresswoman Sanchez, they're on the Ways and Means Committee, and I'm going to defer to them on this. But we've always said you can't do a tax bill without having it be bipartisan. We want to recognize that perhaps we should lower the corporate rate. Maybe that's so, maybe not. What's the case for it? But if you're going to have sustainability in a tax reform, it has to be bipartisan. And instead, they came up with something that gives 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. 86 million middle-class families will be paying more in taxes. They took us deeply into debt to the tune of $2 trillion or more when you include the interest on the national debt, giving a permanent tax cut of over $1 trillion to corporate America. Just not right. Just not right. And so there is a better way to do that. And our path, to just use one word as to what it would look like, is it would be bipartisan. I yield to